So in 2024, I read 20 books, I DNF'd 2 books, and I discovered fanfiction for the first time in my life. So in this video, we're gonna be covering all of that. Also, this video comes with a little bit of an announcement and a new setting. Not to ruin the magic a little bit, but this curtain is literally just covering my vertical blinds for my back door. So last year my goal was to watch 100 new movies, and I did actually hit it, even though by the time I filmed my content for it, I had not hit it yet. But anyway, I watched 100 new to me movies last year. I did a bunch of videos on that if you want to go check it out. This year I decided it's about the books. I want to get back to reading. This is like, I've always loved doing book content, and I watch a lot of book content. I have a lot of great creators that I follow, so I have always wanted to focus more on doing book videos and like reading content. If you have any specific book content requests that you would like to see me do, please leave a comment. But I do have a lot of ideas and a lot of good videos coming your way. Some you can see some hints in the background. Also, do you want a bookshelf tour? I only have the one, but it's cute, and I have a lot of books. It's overflowing already. I need another one. Also, last little thing before we get into all of the 2024 books that I read, I will link my Goodreads and my Storygraph down below. I do update both. I just started my Storygraph at the beginning of this year, so there's not much going on over there. But yeah, if you want to see my journey and follow me along, you can, go follow me over there. Okay, so first in this video, we're going to talk about the DNFs. I DNF'd 2 books this year, and I really do try to give it a fair chance before I DNF. So the first one we're going to talk about is The September House by Carissa Orlando. Now, this follows a woman who refuses to leave her home that is clearly haunted. And this I started reading, I think in September, because it's called The September House. And I just wanted a good like haunted house spooky book, for the season. And it was a little bit more than I signed up for. I read 41% of this book, okay? I borrowed it from my library on Libby. I use Libby a lot, so a lot of times in my book content, you're not going to see the physical book because I try to borrow from my library as much as I can. So reading 41% and deciding to DNF is a lot for me because if I get that far in a book, I might as well finish it. And it is a pretty fast-paced book, I would say. Like, it was easy to read, it was just an easy, digestible kind of book. So usually I would just finish it. It ended up being more of like a dark humor type novel, and I'm not huge on the dark humor, kind of. There are some authors who can do it well and that I like. Grady Hendrix is an example where it's kind of like an ironic storytelling. I can appreciate that, but I have to be in the mood for it. It's really not what really excites me when I read. There's a domestic violence kind of background in the background. Actually, it becomes pretty much in the foreground. That kind of blindsided me in the book, and I didn't expect it. Overall, I wasn't having fun reading this book. It was like, it's not a fun haunted house spooky thing that I wanted. Even though it's kind of a dark humor, the themes in it are really dark and just didn't do it for me. So I just DNF'd it. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll go back and finish the other 60%, but it's just not for me. My next DNF was Wounds, 6 Stories from the Border of Hell by Nathan Ballingrud. This is, of course, a collection of short stories that are on the border of hell. They're all kind of revolving around hell and like what that would be like. I think I read 3 out of the 6 in this, so I read half of the stories, and I actually didn't DNF on purpose. I just ran out of time because I borrowed this from my library, like the physical book from the library, and I just had to return it. I didn't feel like renewing it and finishing the book. The Visible Filth is by far the best story in that book. In fact, it was adapted into a movie. I wish more of the stories were kind of more written like The Visible Filth, because that one was a really good story, but the other ones I read, I just wasn't a huge fan of. Now let's talk about all the books that I read in 2024. These are all ranked from worst to best, and a lot of these, maybe a handful of these, I did talk about in the beginning of 2024. I did a little recap because I read a lot in January and February, so I updated you guys there. So if I've already covered it in the past, last year, I probably won't spend too much time on it. But let's start with the worst book that I read in 2024, and that is Survive the Night by Riley Sager. Now, I listened to this on an audiobook. Audiobooks are really difficult for me. I can't really retain any information when I read an audiobook or listen to an audiobook. I have to physically see the words on the page. That's just my preference. But I feel like Riley Sager books are so easy that you don't necessarily have to remember every single line. It's just you remember the gist of the story, because he is a good storyteller at the end of the day. I did do an entire ranking video of all of the Riley Sager books, all of them except Middle of the Night was not included in that video because it wasn't released yet last year, but I did read that. That is in this video. So Survive the Night follows a girl who accepts a ride home from a stranger while there is an active serial killer on the loose, and she starts to suspect that the driver could be that serial killer. I just don't find the main character in this enjoyable at all or really rooting for her, because the decisions, she's like the dumbest character I've ever read in a book. And like there is a point where main characters have to make bad decisions to move the story along. I get that, but I feel like there was constant justification in this book for why she was making dumb decisions. Like that was half the book at least, was justifying why she was making this decision and why it was dumb, but she had to. She didn't have a choice and like all these things. So it was just really repetitive writing to me, and even for a popcorn thriller, I don't think it was very well done. It's fast and easy. So I was on a mission to read every Riley Sager book. So I achieved that. I have done that. But this was by far my least favorite. Next, we have Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Cesar. I gave this 2 stars. This was borrowed from my library as well. And this is in the teen section of the library. I did cover this already. I did a TikTok on it. I do feel a little guilty rating it so low and ranking it so low as well, because I really wanted to like this one. This follows a girl who moves to a new town where she makes new friends, and she gets invited to this party, this big party at this barn, and there is a killer called Friendo the Clown who is killing them one by one. This is very much a teen slasher vibe. It does have a little bit of dark humor. I personally found the writing so repetitive in this that it took me out of it a couple times, but it's just not my favorite genre to read in general. So that's not really Adam Cesar's fault, but teen slashers, I like movies that are like that, but I don't necessarily like books that are like that. And I don't know why that is. If it's going to be a slasher, I want it to have something else going on and something a little bit more weird, or, just some suspicion of like supernatural something, something a little bit different. And this one was pretty straightforward as a slasher. I will be watching and reviewing the movie though that comes out this year. Next up, we have The Watchers by A.M. Shine. This was a 3-star for me. The movie was also a 3-star for me. I did a whole review video on the movie and did a little book comparison if you are curious about that. So this follows a woman who is stranded in a overgrown forest, and she and a few others are being watched by something at night. Now, this concept was so cool and really hooked me in and sucked me in, but I feel like, one, it got too complicated. I feel like they tried to make the story bigger than it was. I think this would have been a really effective short story and a short film as well. I feel like it didn't need all of that added cushioning going on, the drawn out explanations of things and like backstories. I feel like as a short, it would have been a lot better in both movie and written form. And I did not love how they executed this story in the movie. I felt like it was really, really rushed in the end. And I was really into this book for the first half, and then the second half was just not it. It wasn't really it. I still enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. It's fine. And the first half is really, really good. And the concept is so good. I gave it a full star just for concept alone because I think it's really cool. We have our first physical book copy coming out. I'm going to take them from the shelf as I talk about them. Next is The Woods Are Always Watching by Stephanie Perkins. This is my first Stephanie Perkins book. There's Someone Inside Your House is the other one that she's done. And I really like the movie adaptation for There's Someone Inside Your House. I thought it was really good. This follows 2 friends who are trying to kind of salvage their friendship when they have plans to go to college, so that they decide to do this kind of extreme hike in the woods. And bears are not the only predator that are in these woods. This is also fine. I gave it 3 stars. It's a short read, really easy read. It's pretty fast paced, but it's kind of expected. It's like what I expected it to be like. And again, I prefer supernatural books and stories to to like realistic stories. There are exceptions, of course, but I just found this to be kind of predictable, and overall it's a good popcorn thriller, I would say, because it is so fast paced, but the writing is pretty straightforward. It's easy. You know, I would definitely read her other books. It's just an easy thriller book. There's really nothing else to say about it. Next is The Need by Helen Phillips. This one I unfortunately gave 3 stars as well. I wanted to give this so much more. When I first started this book, I was so into it. I was like, this is a 5-star. This is a 5-star book. I don't know where this is going, what's happening in this story. But this is the kind of weird that I like in stories. I just don't think the finale, you know, the ending really brought it all together for me and gave me enough for it to be 5 stars. This is definitely the most disappointing book that I read last year because I was so excited about it. I wanted to like it so much more. I love books on motherhood and things that I can just relate to. So I just really wanted to love it, and I didn't. So this follows a woman who is a mother of 2, and while her husband is away for work, she has to balance life between being a mom and being a paleobotanist. It's weird, it's existential, it's strange, but I loved that aspect of it. But I really felt like it didn't go anywhere. Like, I was really disappointed by the ending. Maybe it deserves a little bit higher of a rating, but I just went with my gut and gave it a 3. And honestly, with the themes it was exploring with motherhood and everything, I feel like it could have pushed it a lot farther, and maybe I just didn't really get it, but I feel like I wanted more from it. Okay, next up is Rouge by Mona Awad. This is my second book that I have read by Mona Awad. I also gave this 3 stars and bought it on Apple Books. So this follows a woman who is grieving the loss of her mother, and she moves into her apartment in Southern California while she gets all of her affairs in order. And instead, she gets sucked into this world, almost cult of skincare and beauty. And it turns out to be a lot more than it seems. And this is described as a weird girl book. It's a weird girl book. That's a really good way to describe it. I'm still trying to decide if I like Mona Awad. Now, I read this freshly grieving because I wanted to feel something. I've been consuming a lot of books and media in general on grief because it's something that's very fresh with me still, and I think it's a good way to like express it and explore the feelings and emotions of grief. So I read this one, but then I was really disappointed that it didn't focus on the grief as much. There were a few moments where I like could feel it and relate to it. But in general, I feel like the focus was way more on the culty skincare people and less on the grief, which is kind of why I was reading it in the first place. So it's not really the book's fault that I had different expectations, but I do wish the themes kind of came back together to explore grief a little bit more. But yeah, I'm not sure if I love Mona Awad. I enjoy her books. Like, they are weird. When I want a weird book, she's the one. But I don't know if I love her writing style. She has a very unique style, definitely. But I don't know if I'm weird enough, you know? Like, I want to be. I want to be the weird girl that loves Mona Awad. But I'm not sure yet. Like, they're enjoyable, they're entertaining. Bunny is also in this video, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm still deciding. Next up, borrowed from my library on Libby, we have The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager, also a 3. I read a lot of 3-star books. We're still not even done with all the 3 stars that I read. So House Across the Lake follows a woman who moves into a lake house to get out of the public eye when she becomes obsessed with the neighbors across the lake from her and starts spying on them as she thinks she sees something happen over there, and she becomes hyperfixated and obsessed with these people. Now, this was his most different book from any of his other books, and if you've read it, you know exactly why. And I was waiting for another explanation to happen, and it never did. So I was like, that was weird. That was weird for Riley Sager. I appreciate he tried something new, but I don't know if I love it. But I can always count on Riley Sager for a good palate cleanser, popcorn thriller book. Anytime I just like want a fast one, Riley Sager. Although now I've read all his books, so like, it'd be a reread. If you have any suggestions on other popcorn thriller authors that are pretty decent and good storytellers and have really good twists in them, please let me know. This next one's gonna break my heart to talk about. I'm not gonna lie. This one hurts. Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. This is another one I wanted to love with every piece of myself because I love Dead Silence from her. Maybe this one was the most disappointing because this is the one I think I had the highest expectations for, and it just ended up being okay. It wasn't as fun or as exciting as Dead Silence when I read it. Like the reading experience just didn't compare. And maybe that's not fair to really compare between books, but I just had this like expectation. I can't help it. Now this is my top rated 3-star book, like ranked in this video. So I do like it. I enjoyed it a lot, but it just didn't hit like I wanted. Like I love a good space horror or like a sci-fi horror, and this just didn't, it wasn't exactly what I wanted. So this follows a crew who must survive on an abandoned planet, essentially, and there's this weird disease going on that is so cool. The concept, again, is so exciting to me. Like the concept is so original and so unique. It's actually very similar to Dead Silence, and I won't say too much about that, but it did remind me a little bit of like the concept of Dead Silence. I find that S.A. Barnes sci-fi to be really grounded and still feel like a distant reality, like it could possibly happen. It's still a grounded science fiction. It's not too sciencey. I feel like the explanations are really good and also really cool, but it's still like realistic sci-fi, and that I think is really important to me. It is ranked higher though because of the concept and the setting of it being on an abandoned planet, sci-fi space horror. Like it alone, regardless if it was like really bad, it would probably be ranked higher just for that fact alone. So I still enjoyed it. It was still good, but I think my disappointment kind of, you know, took over a little bit when I rated that. Next up, we have Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. This is my first Darcy Coates book I've ever read. Again, I borrowed this on Libby. So this follows a woman who gets stranded in the snowy wilderness of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado on a trip with her boyfriend. And she ends up in a cabin with a bunch of other people who were also on the bus that got stranded. And slowly but surely, they're all being picked off one by one. This is your classic whodunit thriller book. And like I said, it was my first introduction to Darcy Coates. I don't think it's the best introduction to Darcy Coates, to be honest. I gave it 3.5. It was so entertaining, and this was like breakneck speed, fast pace. Like you want fast pace, you want to get out of a reading slump, you should read Dead of Winter because it never ends. It never stops. There was like one chapter that was a little bit of backstory, and it like went to the past for a second, and I was like, oh my God, thank God I can like breathe for a second because there's just so much happening in every single chapter. I did buy Parasite, it's up there somewhere, Parasite and From Below, because again, I love space horror and I love water horror, and she wrote 2 of those. So I bought those. I have not read them yet, but let me know if you've read them and if you like them, or if you read other Darcy Coates book. What is her best book? I know The Haunting of Ashburn House is really, really popular, and I will be reading that in like October of this year. So I'll give you an update as I read more Darcy Coates, but I'm excited to be along for the journey of discovering Darcy Coates. I know she's very loved in the community and talked about a lot. This does do one thing that I'm not a huge fan of, which I will save for my book Ix video, because I am going to be doing a book Ix video. I did a movie Ix. I hate that word, but like, what else do you call that? Things I hate in movies. I did a video on that, so I'm going to be doing a book version of that soon. I'm going to save that for that video, but this did do something I was just like, kind of annoyed by every single time it happened. But it's definitely a thriller trope. A lot of thriller books and authors do it. Like I read this book in 4 days, and as a mom, that should tell you everything. How did I read this in 4 days? Like I got whiplash. I couldn't help myself. Like I literally could not stop myself from reading this book. It did help that I had it on my phone. I think that's one of the ways that that makes it a lot easier to read as a mom, is to have books on your phone. As much as I don't want to be looking at a screen and looking at my phone, I love my physical media. Reading on a phone is just easier when you're a parent, because you can read anytime, anywhere for 2 seconds or 20 minutes, depending on what your toddler's doing. You know what I mean? Now, it was a little bit predictable, somewhat predictable. It did get a couple jaw drops from me though, and the final twist, I'm not gonna lie, was cool. I did think that in the very beginning, and then I kind of forgot about that along the way. And then I was like, no, they never paid attention to it, so I'm not going to really go that direction with my prediction. And then of course, I was right. So it is kind of predictable as far as that goes, but it's a good palate cleanser. It's a fast thriller. It is what it is. Next up, we have The last one by Will Dean. What was that? So this follows a woman who wakes up on a cruise liner and realizes that she is the only one on the ship. That's all I'm gonna say about it. Obviously more happens than that, but this was weird. This was a wild ride. Again, like I said, I love horror or water thrillers. And the concept was so cool and definitely my kind of story. Like the kind of book that I would pick up and be like, that sounds really interesting. I want to read that. But I will say this had pretty average writing to me. I did give this 4 stars because it was very entertaining. But the writing itself was pretty generic as far as like your thriller writers go. Like I just found it to be, I don't know, pretty predictable as far as the writing. Kind of drawn out. I feel like it was a little bit of a slow burn in the beginning. Like nothing really happens for the first 100 pages. I feel like he could have easily edited this a little bit better. It doesn't have to be as fast-paced as something like Dead of Winter by any means, because I do enjoy a little bit more story, but then it started to get a little bit repetitive and it just felt like filler for a little while. And over-explaining. There's a lot of over-explaining in this that took up so much time that I was like, why are we talking about this for the 100th time? Like, I get it. I get it. Like, we get her dad had a gambling problem. Okay, we get it. I don't know why we're bringing that up 100 times in a book where it's not really relevant. You know what I mean? But then the twists start happening at about 100 pages and you're like, wait a second. I will say his writing style, this is the only Will Dean book I've ever read, but it felt like he was discovering the story with us as he wrote it. Like it felt like it kind of expanded on itself as he went along, and I feel like it could have done with some editing to like tie things from the end back to the beginning a little bit. It was like discovery writing and discovery reading, because you can't expect where this book is gonna go ever, and that's fun. But at the same time, I feel like he didn't know what he was writing until he was actually writing it. You know what I mean? Overall fun book though. I gave it 4 stars. Like the entertainment value alone really saved this book. The writing was pretty expected, generic thriller, but the story, really cool. Really should just move my Paul Tremblay hardcovers somewhere else because I keep having to move them. Next up, Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a 4-star book. I did give it 4 stars, but again, I'm still trying to decide if I'm weird enough for Mona Awad, if I'm the audience for her. So this follows a girl who kind of becomes obsessed and like hyper fixated on this group of girls at her writing school, and they all call each other Bunny. And that's all I can really say about it. It's weird, okay? Like I wish I was like, I get it, but I'm still... Maybe a reread? I don't know. Because not everything is grounded in reality, and there's a part of me that kind of needs that, even in my supernatural stories, even in my space horror and sci-fi and anything that's not actually in our reality. I need it to feel a little bit grounded in reality, and her writing is just not. Like, none of her books are really based in reality. And I don't know if I'm weird enough for that. I'm a little bit more literal. I take things a little bit literally instead of like conceptually. And so I feel like that's one of my struggles with reading Mona Awad. Now, some of the chapters stood out to me. Some are really dark. There's some dark themes in this and some really cool descriptions and visuals, and kind of a slower paced book. I don't think this is a good hook book, you know, like compared to other books that I read. I feel like this is a little bit slower. It doesn't really like suck you in like the other books do. I feel like even Rouge kind of sucked me in faster than this one did. This one I enjoyed more than Rouge overall, but I feel like it is a little bit slower. You kind of have to stick with it before you get to like the darker themes and the darker, weird, horrifying chapters. Like I'm just destroying my bookshelf behind me as we go along. That's okay, don't mind the gaps. Now it's not as cute, but whatever. Middle of the Night by Riley Sager. I did buy this new because I'm kind of a Riley Sager fangirl. What can I say? As much as I don't want to be, I can't help it. And this cover, stunning. I love the cover of this. I was actually really excited about this one because it's the first time he has written a male main character. So this is about a man who moves back into his childhood home, where one night when he was 10 years old and he was out sleeping in a tent in his backyard with his best friend went missing. And so when he moves back into his childhood home, he's trying to like piece together the events of that night because he doesn't really have a vivid memory of what happened. I think it's actually unpopular that I like this one. I gave it 4 stars. I've seen a lot of criticism for it, but entertainment-wise, it was good. It's a Riley Sager book. I kind of know what to expect at this point. So for me, it was what I expected, and it's what I signed up for. I think for me, the setting is what really sold it, and maybe that's not gonna be as effective for everyone else, but I love suburbia, setting in suburbia, and this is a suburbia surrounded by woods and weird buildings, you know? I'm not gonna go into it, but yeah, it just, the setting really worked for me, and the concept of like someone being abducted from a tent. It kind of reminded me of camping. I love camping. I love camping horror stories and things, so it kind of had that vibe to it, and maybe that's why. And then the woods and everything. It's still a Riley Sager book, so it's going to be kind of guaranteed entertaining no matter if you like the story or not. I think he's really great at storytelling, and it's not his best book ever, I agree, but I still liked it. I was still happy with my reading experience with this. It was fun. Next up, we have Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is my second Gillian Flynn book that I have read. I did read Dark Places, not a fan. I hated that main character, I'm not gonna lie. The movie, so much worse. I did not like that story at all. I feel like she writes women who aren't really likable, and this is kind of the same thing, but for some reason I liked this story so much more than Dark Places. So this follows a woman who is a journalist, and she's assigned to cover a story in her hometown of the disappearances of these girls. Now, I have not watched the show yet, but I'm very excited to. I've heard really good things about the show. I have not read Gone Girl. That's the only other Gillian Flynn that I have not read. So I do have higher expectations now. Obviously, I've seen the movie though, so I feel like that's why I haven't been excited to read it. But Sharp Objects was really good. 4 stars. I enjoyed it. Next is Foe by Ian Reid. I did also watch the movie for this. I think I talked about this in a previous video. This follows a couple who are living on a secluded farm when a stranger shows up and offers the husband this opportunity, but he has to go very far away. Now, this is part horror, part sci-fi, and to me it kind of leans a little bit literary fiction the way it is written, and the writing and storytelling of this is absolutely beautiful. I gave it 4 stars simply because of the writing, and I want to go back and annotate some of this because some of the writing just really stood out to me. When I annotate, I usually save or like flag sentences or paragraphs that I find really beautiful and like inspiring to me as a writer. Now, this is more like psychological, more immersive than your traditional horror novel, I would say. And it makes you like question along the way what you would do if you were put in this situation. And overall, I just loved where the story went. I thought the ending was incredible. It was beautiful. Really great ending for this kind of book. Did I see it coming? Yes, I did. I did kind of predict what was happening in the end, but that's okay. It still had the same impact for me. This is my second Ian Reid novel that I read. I did also read I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and loved the book, hated the movie, but I am also interested in We Spread. We Spread sounds really good, and just, I feel like that would be a really entertaining setting for a kind of horror. I don't want to say he's like a traditional horror author, but there are like horror elements to his books. Next up, I reread Come Closer by Sarah Gran. I was just craving like something short, and the first time I read this, I think I was like 8 months pregnant or something, and so I don't have the strongest memory of reading this. I have talked about Come Closer before. It is a possession story. It's like my favorite possession story, I think. The most beautifully written and believable and descriptive story of a woman being possessed, and I love this book so much. I feel like it needs to be rated a 5, but it is the highest rated. After this, we're getting into all my 5-star reads of 2024, which I'm so excited to talk about. I rarely reread books, but this one's short. It's like 100 pages or so I thought I would just read it. But yeah, just one of my favorite possession stories. If you haven't read it yet, please read it. Next up, we have We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaward. This is out on loan to a friend right now, so I don't have my physical copy of it, but I did read the physical book. This follows a couple who just purchased a house when a man and his family come to the door and ask if they can come in because he used to live there. And of course they oblige begrudgingly, and weird things start happening inside the house. This is such a strange book in all the best ways. Like, I was obsessed with where this book went. It was so unexpected. I thought it was going to be either your traditional like home invasion, even though they're not like invading the home, but you know, they like refuse to leave. So I'm like, okay, they're gonna be killers or something. Or it's gonna be supernatural, like weird ghosty things are happening in the house, and the house is actually haunted and it's related to this man. man, right? It was both of those, yet neither of those. And it was just so good. Like, where this goes, it was just so mind-bending. But it has you really questioning reality. It has you questioning our narrator. Like, I just feel like all of it, you're like, what is happening? What's reality? What's going on? But it was still really digestible at the same time. Like, it was really entertaining. I always wanted to read it. I never wanted to put this book down, but it was still like super mind-bending and just so good. 5 stars, no notes, really, really good. Next, we have The Ritual by Adam Neville. This book has now a soft spot in my heart. I do have my problems with it, but let me tell you, this book, incredible writing. Some of my favorite writing I have ever read. This definitely deserves a reread with annotating because some of the lines are so beautiful. I was like reading them out loud to my partner because I was like, listen to this English language that Adam Neville is using to write this book. I also love the movie. I rarely read the book after I watch the movie, so it kind of takes a lot for me to want to do that because I feel like I already know everything. But I will say this is different from the movie. So if you love the movie, you can still read this and have a different kind of experience. This follows 4 college friends who reunite after one of their friends passes away, and they decide to do a 3-day hike throughout the Scandinavian wilderness. One of them becomes injured and they kind of get trapped in the woods. Now, like I said, I have my issues with it. The first 85% of this book, perfection. No criticisms at all. The descriptions of the dream sequences specifically, beautiful, stunning. The horror visuals, gorgeous. The tension building in this, the characters that most of them are not likable. But the huge red flag to me, which is so unfortunate because this is a perfect book otherwise, is the fat phobia in the last 15% of this book or so. Not a huge fan of that. Don't love how Adam Neville writes women, and the just major fat phobia throughout the entire book regarding one of the characters. But then most of it, you're thinking you want it to be character driven. You want it to be the character motivation and the character's opinions, not Adam Neville's. You know what I mean? And that's my kind of defense that I'm creating in my head, is it has to do with the character that we're following being fat phobic. It's uncomfortable though. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. Despite that, the horror is just some of my favorite horror I have ever read. Like the visuals, it's gory, but it's still beautiful. Like I can't hype this book up enough. Please read it even if you have already seen the movie because it's stunning. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. Now this is And Other Misfortunes. So there are 3 stories within this book. The first story obviously being the most talked about and the title story, which is 2 women who meet online and their relationship becomes disturbing and toxic. So he's kind of in the splatterpunk category of extreme horror. I didn't find it to be that disturbing personally. I find that I can read disturbing content a lot better than like watching it in a movie. Hence why we have these books right here, which is for an upcoming video if you want to guess. However, the second story in this book is my all-time favorite out of this book. I think the writing is so stunning. I feel like Eric LaRocca's writing is just so inspiring to me and beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing. My current read is actually one of his books. I got an ARC from him. He sent it to me personally, and it's At Dark I Become Loathsome, and so far really loving it. Again, it's a story and a book on grief that I saved unknowingly for when I would also be grieving, so it's very interesting timing, but it comes out later this month. Anyway, the second story is just so stunning. It's about a couple who go on a trip to this island after their son commits suicide, and it's kind of a dystopian time where they have proven that there is no afterlife and life after death does not exist, and that is why suicides are on the rise. I think it's a genius idea, and the visual descriptions from that story, stunning, beautiful. Okay, we have 2 more 5-star books that I'm going to talk about, and then we're going to get into fan fiction. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten yet. We're going to talk about fan fiction for a minute. So next up we have A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. Again, 5 stars, obviously. I own this on my phone. This will probably be my next reread book because, again, it's like 100 pages or so. It's really, really short. It's more of a novella. So this follows a man who dies and goes into an afterlife created by a god that he's never heard of before. And it's essentially a vast library that you can only escape from if you find the one book that contains your life story. And this library contains every book known to man, and then some. This story is incredible. The visuals alone in this are just the vastness of this space. You can't even fathom it. You can't comprehend how large this library is. It's so existential and it's just so strange, but in exactly the way that I love it to be. Like, it is so beautiful. And this is one of those concepts where you're like, how did they come up with that? Like, why didn't I think of that first? Like, it's genius. It's so good. And my favorite book of the year might be a little bit controversial. Let me grab it. We gotta go up on my YA shelf up here first to get it. Yes, my favorite book is a YA book. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Listen, okay, everyone has personal tastes, but this book is so good. Of course, this takes place during the 10th Hunger Games, and Coriolanus Snow is made a mentor for the female tribute from District 12, which again is just his backstory as to why he has a disdain for District 12, specifically the female tributes like Katniss Everdeen, okay? Listen, this story, I'm like jealous. I'm jealous of this storytelling. She is so good. She's brilliant at storytelling. I love Suzanne Collins. The Hunger Games series is one of my favorites of all time. I've reread it. They're like my comfort books and my comfort movies. I love The Hunger Games. And this gave me that same feeling of that escaping into that world. And I discovered that I really love a morally gray character, like a main character that is we're not really rooting for, because we know President Snow, I mean, this is his backstory. So we know who he becomes and how he is kind of the antagonist of the traditional original 3 Hunger Games books. And this, we're getting a peek into why he's the way he is. And yes, sometimes we have sympathy for him and sometimes we're questioning his decisions. And it's just, I love that. I think it's so entertaining to have a morally gray character where you don't know necessarily if you should like them or hate them. And I think that's fun. And I love that she is not afraid. Suzanne Collins, she's not afraid of some good storytelling. For the sake of a plot, she will throw in some twists in there that seem forbidden, but she will put it in there anyway. And I love that. Like, the way this book ends, it's great. It makes sense. It makes sense to me. I totally understand why people would not enjoy this book, but this is what made me discover that I love a good character that you don't know if you should root for or not. And I think that's really fun, makes for entertaining read. And just the writing in general is beautiful. It was the longest book I read last year, but I read it pretty fast because I love it. I love everything about this book. The movie should have been in 2 parts. The movie's not that great. Okay, let's get into fan fiction, shall we? Speaking of morally gray characters, Draco Malfoy. Yeah, I read Manacled by Sen-Lin Yu, and I had downloaded it a while ago before it was taken down off of AO3, and I know a lot of people downloaded it. This is my first fan fiction I've ever completed, which is kind of weird. People say you shouldn't start with Manacled if you're getting into Hermione. I love Hermione, okay? I'm just admitting it. Should I be embarrassed? I don't know. Almost 35 years old, and I ship Hermione, and I read Hermione fan fiction. And what are you gonna do about it? Now, I'm not officially reviewing or rating fanfiction because that is not what its intent is, so I won't ever be logging it because it's not meant to be in comparison to other published works. It is fanfiction. It is for, you know, a gift for the audiences who love these stories and these worlds. I am really happy that Sen-Lin Yu is getting officially published, and it's going to be called Alchemized. I will be purchasing and I will be reading that book. Now, will I love it as much because it's not Hermione and Draco? I don't know, but I can see why they're officially publishing it. They're obviously going to have to change a lot of things about it because a lot of it is, you know, IP, and between Harry Potter and The Handmaid's Tale, obviously things will have to be changed a little bit. But I think her world building and her writing and adding on to the magic and the magic system that is in Harry Potter was incredible. Like, she deserves to be published, like formally published. Now, I don't like romance, so you're probably wondering, why would you read Manacled? I don't think it's a romance. That's not a romance fan fiction. I'm sorry. I am gonna read other Hermione fanfics, don't get me wrong. But I mean, to start with Manacled, where do I go from there? Like, it's just, if I'm gonna read a romance, I need it to be slow burn. I love enemies to lovers, okay? I'm sorry. I like a forbidden love, a little enemies to lovers situation, okay? The yearning, the slow burn. I don't love spice, so there is some spice, obviously, in Hermione. Not a huge fan of that once it actually started happening. I was more into it before it happened. Now, I do want to address, why would I read Hermione if there's graphic essay? And I feel like in this, there are about 3 scenes, I would say, that are a little bit on the graphic side. And I really like Senlin Yu's approach to them because she gives you fair warning each time. There is a reason. I feel like I had this thought before I read Manacled. I'm like, why would someone want to read a story where this happens? She is a surrogate to Draco Malfoy, and then she falls in love with him. Like, that sounds horrible. Why would I want to read that? She obviously has like Stockholm syndrome, right? It's not like that. It's not that. It's not that. So if you are judging it all or thinking it is, it's not. It all makes sense after some time. So you just have to kind of give it a chance. Obviously the beginning, brutal, rough, and tragic. So it's a tragic story. But the way that she wrote the war, horrifying, horror. So I feel like recommending it. If you like horror novels and you like Harry Potter, you should probably read Manacled because it was graphic and it was tragic. It was so sad. It was heartbreaking. And I feel like the most heartbreaking parts of Manacled no one ever talks about. And it has to do with the Weasleys. Why did no one... I cried during that. I cried during that, but not in the end. I didn't cry in the end. I didn't cry any of the Hermione parts, but I did cry about the Weasleys, specifically Arthur. So I had to put my phone down and stare at the wall for a little bit to like recover because it's heartbreaking. Anyway, there you have all of the books and fan fiction and DNFs from 2024. I hope to read so much more, and I will hopefully be giving you updates as I go along, either quarterly or monthly. You got a pizza pop. Got a pizza pop. You ran across the road, right?
Yeah. And we screamed because there was cars and it almost hit us.
No, don't say that.